The Dow Jones Industrial Average reached 21,000 points for the first time in history, reflecting that wealthy investors understood exactly what unified Republican government means: massive wealth transfers from working people to the investor class. The Republican House passed 3 bills designed to make it nearly impossible for federal agencies to protect Americans from corporate abuse by creating massive logistical bottlenecks in the regulatory process. All 3 bills were prevented from becoming law because of filibuster threats from Democratic senators. House Republicans also voted to repeal an Obama regulation that had required corporations to keep records of when their employees are injured at work. Unlike the 3 deregulatory bills, this was another Congressional Review Act resolution and was therefore immune to Senate filibusters. It was eventually signed into law by President Trump. Attorney General Jeff Sessions recused himself from any potential Justice Department investigations into Russian interference in American elections after it became obvious that during his confirmation hearing in January, he had lied under oath about whether he met with Russian officials during the 2016 presidential election campaign. While the recusal itself was the legally and ethically correct action, it was forced by Sessions' perjury during his confirmation hearing. This recusal will repeatedly infuriate Trump over the next few years, as he expected Sessions to help him obstruct justice by blocking the investigation. He immediately begins pressuring Sessions to unrecuse himself. The White House confirmed public reporting that in December 2016, Trump's incoming National Security Advisor Michael Flynn and his son-in-law and senior advisor Jared Kushner met with the Russian ambassador. During the meeting, Flynn and Kushner apparently suggested to the Russian ambassador that they set up a back channel between the Trump team and the Kremlin using Russian communication facilities inside the Russian embassy. Setting up a back channel with foreign diplomats is totally normal. Setting it up to be hidden from your own country's intelligence agencies is not. Trump formally asked Congress to cut 17% of the budget of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and specifically to cut 40% of the agency's satellite climate change tracking budget. In a partially successful effort to distract the media, and therefore the public, from what appears to be potentially treasonous conduct by several members of his administration, Trump began lying about President Obama having wiretapped Trump Tower. Trump issued a second Muslim ban executive order after federal courts had blocked the original version. This new order removed Iraq from the list of banned countries, reduced the indefinite Syrian refugee suspension to 120 days, and was scheduled to go into effect the following week rather than immediately. But this was still bigotry disguised as national security policy. The changes were purely cosmetic attempts to make the ban more legally defensible while maintaining its core purpose of fulfilling Trump's campaign promise of a Muslim ban. Disgraced former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn registered with the Justice Department as a foreign agent. Flynn had apparently been lobbying for the Turkish government during and possibly after the 2016 presidential campaign, for which he'd been paid approximately $500,000. He did not register as a foreign agent during the campaign, during the transition, or while he was serving as National Security Advisor. He had access to the nation's most highly classified secrets during that time and played a major role in setting our national security policy. Americans who lobby for foreign governments are required to register as foreign agents with the Justice Department. Intentional failure to do so is a felony. And keep in mind, Flynn was a 3-star general who had retired from active duty as the nation's highest-ranking military intelligence officer. It's just not plausible that he didn't know the laws about foreign agent registration. The Republican House majority voted, for the second time in 2 weeks, to help Trump continue to hide his finances from the American public, defeating a Democratic resolution that would have required the Treasury Department to provide his tax documents to Congress. The Republican House passed 3 bills that together would have made it virtually impossible for people to sue corporations. All 3 bills were prevented from becoming law because of filibuster threats from Democratic senators. Trump abruptly fired all 46 remaining U.S. attorneys appointed by President Obama. These are Senate-confirmed federal prosecutors who run the individual Justice Department offices in each state. They are political appointees, and they do usually, but not always, change when a president of a different party takes office. But this is generally done gradually as their replacements are confirmed, in order to ensure the smooth operation of federal prosecutions and lawsuits. Something prompted this action. Almost a decade later, we still don't really know what it was. Trump held his first televised cabinet meeting in which each cabinet secretary was required to publicly thank Trump and lavish him with absurdly slavish personal compliments in front of cameras in a bizarre North Korean-style forced praise ritual that had never been seen in American government. The Republican Senate confirmed GOP political operative Seema Verma, who had spent her career helping Republican governors make it harder for people with low incomes to access health care, to run the agency that administers Medicare and Medicaid. The Republican House majority voted for the third time in 3 weeks to help Trump continue to hide his finances from the American public, again defeating a Democratic resolution that would have required the Treasury Department to provide his tax documents to Congress. 2 different federal district court judges, one in Hawaii and one in Maryland, blocked Trump's second Muslim ban from going into effect, ruling that the evidence showed it was motivated by, quote, religious animus, rather than any factual security concerns. Trump formally asked Congress to cut $54 billion from 18 different federal agencies, including cutting more than 30% of the Environmental Protection Agency's budget, cutting more than 30% from the State Department, cutting 20% from the National Institutes of Health, and gutting scientific research and programs that support Americans with low incomes. White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer accused the British government of wiretapping Trump on behalf of President Obama. This was a completely fabricated conspiracy theory designed to legitimize Trump's lies about Obama wiretapping him. Instead, it had the predictable effect of really pissing off the British government, prompting the Trump administration to actually issue a formal apology to the United Kingdom, with assurances that the lie would not be repeated. The Republican House passed a bill that would have changed the law to allow people diagnosed with schizophrenia to buy guns if they happen to be veterans. Democratic senators prevented the bill from becoming law by threatening to filibuster. Former Democratic National Committee Chair Donna Bazile admitted that she had forwarded debate questions to Hillary Clinton's campaign before 2 primary debates with Bernie Sanders. This had been part of the Democratic Party's systematic effort to prevent a progressive candidate from winning the nomination. So-called moderates in the Democratic Party have demonstrated countless times during this era that they would prefer far-right fascists running the country if the alternative is absurdly wealthy political donors being slightly less absurdly wealthy. Trump accused Germany of owing money to NATO, drawing immediate criticism from European officials. While Trump's specific language about Germany owing money to NATO was technically incorrect, NATO members commit to spending 2% of their GDP on defense, but they don't owe money to the alliance. His underlying point was entirely valid. American taxpayers have been heavily subsidizing the defense of wealthy European nations for close to a century now, while those countries consistently spend far less than their agreed commitments on their own defense. Whether Trump was genuinely trying to pressure Europe to shoulder more of its own defense burden or deliberately attempting to undermine the NATO alliance is unclear, but either way, he was raising a legitimate grievance that both Democrats and establishment Republicans had largely ignored for decades. American working families shouldn't be paying for the defense of countries that are perfectly capable of funding their own militaries, but choose to spend the money on social programs instead while relying on American military protection, which in turn makes it even more difficult than it already is for Americans to create similar social programs for ourselves. The FBI director and the NSA director both publicly told the House Intelligence Committee that, as far as they know, Trump was lying about President Obama having wiretapped him. This hearing was also the first time that the FBI publicly confirmed that it was conducting a counterintelligence investigation into the Russian government's attack on the 2016 American election, and that the scope of the investigation included determining whether members of the Trump campaign committed any crimes in relation to that attack. The Republican House majority voted for the 4th time in 4 weeks to help Trump continue to hide his finances from the American public, defeating a Democratic resolution that would have required the Treasury Department to provide his tax documents to Congress. The Republican House passed a bill that would have made it harder for state governments to regulate worthless health insurance plans that insurance companies try to sucker people into buying. Democratic senators prevented the bill from becoming law by threatening to filibuster. 4 people, including a police officer, were murdered in a mass shooting in Wisconsin when a man shot up his wife's workplace. President Trump and the Republican-controlled Congress did nothing. The Republican Senate voted to repeal an Obama regulation that had been preventing internet service providers from selling your browsing history, location data, and other personal information without your permission. This was another Congressional Review Act resolution and was therefore immune to Senate filibusters. It was eventually signed into law by President Trump. The House debated the Republican Obamacare Repeal bill. Repealing Obamacare was the Republican priority for the first half of this year. And so, for the previous 2 months or so, while party leaders were trying to come up with a plan that a majority of their party would vote for, the House and Senate and the White House have just sort of been doing whatever random things they could get done without much effort. All these regulatory repeal votes and the messaging bills to their billionaire donors that keep getting blocked by Democratic senators, this was basically the GOP doing layups while they waited for House Speaker Paul Ryan, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, and Trump's White House advisors to put this bill together. And this week, everybody finally got to see it. The bill was a nightmarish attack on the American people. It essentially would have denied medical treatment to between 20 and 30 million Americans, and it raised insurance premiums on everyone in order to fund an $800 billion tax cut for billionaires. It really was attempted murder. It would have resulted in the unnecessary deaths of tens of thousands of Americans every single year, and everyone in Congress knew it. After debating the bill with Democrats for several hours in the House, Speaker Paul Ryan was unexpectedly forced to cancel the House vote on it at the last minute because too many Republican politicians were refusing to vote for it. But those Republicans were refusing to vote for it because they wanted it to take health care from even more Americans in order to fund an even bigger tax cut for oligarchs. And so it couldn't pass the House, even though the Republicans had more than a 40-seat majority at the time. But it will be back. The Labor Department delayed the implementation of a regulation to make mines safer for miners. This regulation will ultimately not be implemented for more than 2 more years, and it will take a federal appeals court order to force the Labor Department to implement this basic mine safety law. Trump formally asked Congress to cut $18 billion from mental health programs, public housing budgets, education funding, and a program that feeds 40 million impoverished children around the world. The Republican House majority voted for the 5th time in 5 weeks to help Trump continue to hide his finances from the American public, defeating again a Democratic resolution that would have required the Treasury Department to provide his tax documents to Congress. Trump ordered the Environmental Protection Agency to remove restrictions on fracking, to begin work on reversing President Obama's Clean Power Plan, and to no longer consider climate change during policy deliberations. Staff at the Energy Department's Office of International Climate and Clean Energy were told to stop using the phrase climate change or emissions reduction in written documents. Environmental Protection Agency Administrator Scott Pruitt rejected his own agency's scientists' recommendation and refused to ban a pesticide that causes learning and memory loss in children. The Republican House passed 2 bills. One would have replaced scientists on EPA advisory boards with chemical industry operatives, and the other would have restricted the kinds of scientific studies that the EPA can use to justify regulations. Democratic senators prevented both bills from becoming law by threatening to filibuster. Disgraced former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn offered to testify to the Senate Intelligence Committee in exchange for immunity from prosecution in relation to the Russian attack on the 2016 American election. His offer was rejected by the committee. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson and UN Ambassador Nikki Haley both announced that forcing Syrian President Bashar al-Assad from power was no longer a U.S. policy priority. This was a major shift from Obama administration policy, which had made Assad's departure a key objective. Having both the Secretary of State and UN Ambassador make these statements on the same day signaled a fundamental change in U.S. Syria policy that essentially gave Assad and his Russian supporters a green light to continue their war crimes against Syrian civilians without fear of U.S. intervention to remove the regime, which is exactly what happened almost immediately.